Good morning. In the late summer of 1963, a guy named Phil Watson called me from Oklahoma Christian College, at where I was living at Itasca, Texas, and said, "I need to get you to come up here and talk to me. I'd like to talk to you about hiring you to go to work for me." I never heard of Phil Watson, didn't know who that was, but I knew that I needed to do something besides being a preacher. So I drove up here and talked to him, and the rest is history. He became one of the most important people in my life for a number of years, and we did a lot of stuff together and had a lot of pleasure together. He wanted me to sign up to recruit students for Oklahoma Christian College. That sounded okay to me, so I said, okay, we'll do that. And I went back down to Texas and told the people that I was about to move. We'll talk about that later at the end of Romans, when we talk about saying goodbye to Christian folk that you love. In Itasca, a guy had moved there some months before who was a military career guy. I think he was a major of some kind, and put in a jewelry store. It turns out that he was a self-appointed philosopher, and he decided one day to give me a lecture about the nature of the world to help me get into that new job I was about to take. So we went to get a drink, and he gave me a lecture about the world. And what he said was, the world isn't the way you think it is. You're going to hear this and that and that and that, but this is really true. He probably said some things I agreed with then and agree with now, but not much. I thought most of what he said was kind of slanted and twisted and not very helpful to me in what I was about to undertake. So I came to Oklahoma City to go to work, and as I said a while ago, the rest is history. About 50 years ago, it was time for our 10-year accreditation study at OCC, which is always a nerve-wracking experience. They send in professionals from various places to dismantle you and tell you everything that's wrong with you, which they promptly proceeded to do, but we got accreditation continued, so it worked out okay. But there was one thing that the accreditation people said in their report at the end that was very interesting to me. They said, we consider the main challenge of this college to be that everybody is in agreement. Everybody looks the same, sounds the same, all say the same stuff, are all on the same page, and we consider that to be a major problem. I thought, what? I thought that's how things were supposed to be. You were supposed to get along, and indeed, that's an important thing, as we know right now, because all the politicians are pleading for unity and promptly doing everything to promote disunity. And I think that can be equally said about all sides in the political debate. But there are times when unity is very crucial. In my work life, one of those times was when I was doing marriage counseling. in my lifetime, the divorce rate has increased greatly and still is, to where it's close to 50%. It's hard to be married if you don't agree and have unity. Church life. It's hard to have successful church life without agreement and unity. And Paul's message is, it is very crucial to do that. You need to be united. That's our topic today. And the thing we're going to deal with is his introduction in chapter 15 to that thought about each one of us being responsible for the other one and taking care of those who are weak. Let me read. We who are strong ought to bear with the failings of the weak, and not to please ourselves. Let each of us please his neighbor for his good, to edify him. For Christ did not please himself. Excuse my bobble there. I'm old and I've got bad eyes. Next week, we're going to deal with Paul on the Gentiles. He goes to great lengths to talk about the value of the Gentiles in this unity and looking after one another. But today, we're going to focus on looking after each other and especially taking care of those who are weak. Let's review just a second what we know about Paul in Romans as he lectured those people about the nature of the world and all that. First of all, let's talk just a second about Paul himself. He was a single man. He was a very active man, highly educated. In my earlier lesson, I quoted the scholar that said that Paul very likely may have studied virtually everything in the world there was to study at that time. He was a Jew, a Roman. He got involved with people in all kinds of ways and spent the balance of his adult life after his conversion in missions. He just had one thing on his mind. It was always there and always was the ruling thing. I've told you about my friend from college that is like that. If you talk to him on the phone, you won't talk 15 seconds before he's talking religion. And I've said about him, and I've said to him, that in my knowledge, he's the most religious person I've ever known that wasn't in the hospital. That was Paul. He was on mission journeys. He was raising money to take to Jerusalem for benevolence. And Romans is kind of an effort to raise mission help, because he wants to come to see them and then go on to Spain to do mission work there. Let's do Paul on man for just a minute. Humans are born to die because of what Adam did, and representatively everybody participated in that with him. All humans are going to die. But all humans are also going to be raised, going to live because of what Christ did to nullify what Adam did. Humans are contradictory. Paul says that about himself, that he wants to do one thing and does something else, and he's very frustrated about that, and finally in frustration he just cries out, "Wretched man that I am, who is to deliver me from myself?" Well, we know that's right. We all are packages of mixed things and contradictions, and therein lies our problem. And we tend to get things wrong. Call it sin, error, whatever, however you want to put it. We tend to get it wrong and do bad stuff. All we have to do is look around and see it. But we also have the ability to do good things. and especially to believe in the realities of the universe that can work to our advantage and apply to ourselves, get for ourselves the blessings of God. Paul on the world. The world is messed up. It needs to be fixed. Everything about it is twisted and wrong, and it's awaiting for redemption. And the world is divided. There's a lot of consideration about race and diversity in Romans, and it almost sounds like it was written for our day and time. Paul on God, unlike the God of the Old Testament, who was vengeful and angry and prepared to punish just at the drop of a hat, he presents God as being on our side. God went to a lot of trouble to make things all right for us, and is still doing that, and is eventually going to make everything right for us. And when all is said and done, the only thing that matters is, how is it between you and God? So, the first part of Romans 15, we who are strong ought to bear with the failings of the weak. In my boyhood, I can't estimate how often we heard the phrase, "You shouldn't be doing that," or "You should do that," to be a good example. That got to be a kind of aggravating thing at our house. Be a good example. What in the world does that mean? Why should I do what I do because of what some other kid does or doesn't do? And there were all kinds of things that were quoted about being a good example, and we'll be talking about that as we go along. But I'd like to raise this question and talk about it for a while. What does it mean to take care of the weak, to bear with the weak, and to be a good example? What kinds of things constitute weakness? I'd like to roar around for a while about that, so let's do that. I've jotted down some things here that might qualify as weakness. The first one I'm just calling sheer ignorance, just not knowing things. We deal with people that don't know as much as we do, and we also deal with people that know a lot more. There's something kind of embarrassing and troubling about people that don't know. When you hear people spouting off in some area, and it could be any area virtually, and they obviously don't know what they're talking about, that's kind of troubling. I think about myself. Judy and I began collecting blue willow china in about 1978 or so. We enjoyed doing that then and still do. And after we had gotten quite a number of pieces, somewhere in the 1 to 2,000, we had a show of blue willow at the Quail Springs Church. Invited the community, invited an expert to come and speak and all that. And we had a lot of fun. That went well. And after some days after that was over, a reporter from the Daily Oklahoman came to interview me about that show and about blue willow dishes and all that. And so I spouted off for a good long while there, and they printed that in the paper. And I cut a copy of that out and saved it, and a while back I was digging through papers and found that and read it. And it was like, oh my word. I don't want anybody to see that, anybody I know that has any connection, because what it was a profession of just plain wrong, just ignorance. I suppose we could consider that one of the failings that we have to deal with, and we ought to deal with it in a Christian manner. Second is heresy, where somebody is just off the wall and wrong about the fundamental elements of right and wrong, about religion, about God, about Christ, etc. I know that in various lessons I have talked about Judy and me being at Eric one Sunday morning for where her folks live. Got there kind of late and went in the auditorium class, and the guy was teaching from the Gospels, talking about the crucifixion and burial of Jesus, and took the position that has been a nut idea for various places, that Christ didn't die, that he just swooned, that all that was real hard on him, and he just swooned. They put him in the grave, and it was cool in there and moist, and he came to, and they brought him out. I'm sitting there listening to that, and I'm a visitor, and I don't want to butt in, with what's going on and act like a smart aleck. But after a while, I thought, well, wait a minute, I can't just let that go on. I got to say something about that. So I raised my hand and said, let me remind you that the basis of the Christian gospel is the death, burial, and resurrection, ascension of Jesus. Well, when I did, the entire class just jumped all over that guy. That was just sheer heresy. Bear with the failings of the weak. That guy was weak. He needed to be sitting on the back row, not up teaching. But I don't think they hurt him physically. I think he managed to escape. A third weakness, maybe, is what I call deliberate stupidity. In my work as a marriage and family counselor, which I did part-time in addition to teaching at OCC, people got in pickles, situations that seemed insoluble. There's no way to solve it. A marries B, and C marries D, and E marries F, and they have a bunch of kids, and they all get divorces and marry each other, and then they join the church, and what are we going to do now? And the church is in a plight about it. And you've painted God in a corner, so to speak. So what do we do now? And somebody comes up with the idea of, we split up all those families, and everybody lives a celibate life, separate from each other, and what? If you find yourself having painted God in a corner, you're on the wrong track. There's a solution to that. It would make Solomon cringe, but that can be dealt with. But sometimes it seems as though people just deliberately find the worst possible approach to something and perpetuate that. That's weak. And then there's just plain dumb. One of my favorite stories from Raymond Kelsey, who was a Bible teacher at OCC during my era. He's talking about tutoring a student who was needing some help in New Testament. I think they were in Corinthians. And he talked to the kid for a good long while about Paul said this, and Paul said that, and Paul said this. And then whenever they got through, he said, okay, let me give you a little test, a little verbal test. Who wrote Corinthians? And he said, Jesus? Just plain dumb, I guess is all right to call that. And that requires a Christian approach. which we'll talk about later. There are those that are new. Judy and I and Linda Dills, on a big trip to England and Scotland, discovered Scottish country dancing and wound up doing that, all that jumping around and running back and forth and all that. I particularly was just awful at it. And I have to say that the ones that were experienced were kind to me. The leader, who was himself Scottish, said to me, "Jim, I'm proud of you," because I got certain steps right. I was weak because I was new. The rest of them got better. I didn't necessarily get better. There are people who are new to Christianity. They just barely got in the front door, and they need guidance and patience. Then there are those that are young. Back to a story of mine that I've used many times in my work. Graduated from Abilene Christian College in 1960 and went to preach at a little church in Central Texas. 22-year-old guy going to be the spiritual leader of 125 precious souls. I look back on that and think, good lands, what were we doing? The first thing that happened is one of the prominent ladies in the church got sick and died. And I, of course, was called upon to do the funeral. Now, I owned a black suit, and I'd had a class in baptizings and weddings and funerals and all that, so I knew what to do. I had taken a degree in Bible, so I knew what to say and where the scriptures were. And I need to confess that in my inner self, I was in great turmoil. I felt the need to flee. What I need to do is to get out of here, because I'm dealing with stuff here that I don't understand and can't feel. And these people are preoccupied with only that fact, that this person is dead, and they're acting accordingly. My conclusion from that was that I had a personality disorder, that something was terribly wrong with me. As I got older, I came to understand that what was wrong with me was I was 22 years old. We get presented a lot of kids, I'll call them, to give spiritual guidance. They have special ability to interpret the Bible or life or something of that sort. That's all nonsense. When there hasn't been time for growth and understanding and experience, people are just spouting things when it's that kind of deal. And as I got older, my problem was not that I needed to flee. My problem was that I got too involved with those who were grieving and had to be careful that I didn't lose my ability to help. Again, weak. Those who have improper motivation. It's a sad fact that churches have people who are not good people looking for good things. Sometimes that's just ordinary members, and sometimes it's leaders. It was my sad plight occasionally to have some woman come and tell me what had happened between her and one of the church leaders. There were two cases in particular in the neighborhood time of the OC lectureship, when college girls came and told me that they had been involved with prominent speakers on the lectureship. That is a particular kind of weakness, and in my opinion requires dealing with, which is not to continue to idolize somebody who's doing that kind of stuff. There are those who are reckless. They come up with harebrained ideas and press those to see if they can get their deal going about that, and that's certainly weak. virtually every eldership I was ever in, every elders meeting that I was ever in, a subject came up where somebody was pressing some idiot idea. And there had to be, decisions had to be made how not only to handle that, but to not injure the person who was holding to that idea. The reckless are those who just simply just don't care. One other, and then we'll get away from that. In the early 70s, when I was interim minister for the Village Church of Christ, the state was involved in the question of liquor by the drink. About to have election about that. The elders of the Village Church called me in and said, would you be willing to do a sermon about liquor by the drink? Yeah, sure. About liquor, and yeah, I'd be happy to do a sermon about that. But let me say this. I won't be preaching this party line that you're hearing, this the political roundup of both sides. I'll try to find what I think is scripture about it and preach accordingly. And of course, all of you all know that old joke about the guy who was the two religious folk that were fussing at each other. And the one said, your group is a bad group because your people drink wine. And he replied to him, well, you know, of course, that Jesus made wine and probably drank it. Yes, I know it, and I'd have thought a lot more of him if he wouldn't have done it. I was not going to preach that line. And they said, it's all right, man, just let it go. People that get these agendas, and there are plenty of them, I think you'd have to consider that as a weakness. And if you are one who is strong and needing to help somebody who is weak, be a good example, you will be called on to deal with them right at that very problem. That will be the question that will have to be dealt with, and your capacity to do that will determine how successful you are. So as we look at this, we try to think, what kinds of things, what are things that we ought to be super careful about? In my family, there were questions about playing cards. That's silly, playing cards. Doesn't matter one way or the other. Or going to the movies. And things of that sort. So, in addition to being cautious about painting God in a corner, we need to be careful about being silly. I don't suppose you ought to say to someone that an idea they've got is silly, but you may want to express that in a way that, on a scale of 1 to 10, that's a -4. Let me do, as I get closer to the end here, about a challenge that I faced when I was working for Phil Watson as Director of Admissions at Oklahoma Christian College. First of all, let me say that that job gave me the opportunity to meet and interact with some of the best people that you can possibly imagine. People who were successful and warm and caring and serious about church life, knowledgeable about the Bible. They liked me and treated me well, and in lots of occasions when I had a chance to testify about how things were going in my stumbling way, I said that the constituency of people that we dealt with in that college were remarkable. But I picked out one that was kind of a challenge. And I guess it was a weakness. Let's postulate Citizen X, Christian X, who is a successful businessman worth several $1 million, has a fairly large extended family, wants to make contributions to the college, which we, of course, we were in favor of. We needed contributions, and went to great lengths to see if we could make that happen, and wanted those contributions to be applied to the expenses of their children or grandchildren, which seems like a noble idea. Only thing is, it's a crime. The IRS and those who do such things consider that illegal, that contributions cannot be stipulated for any kind of advantage other than deduction on your taxes, which was the whole point of the thing, is I want to give all this money and get a double whammy deduction on it. And when I had to say to them, I'd love to do that for you, but I can't do that because that's illegal. Did they get mad at me? They did. They got mad at me. I didn't want them to be mad at me. I wanted them to be in a good mood with me. I was trying to be helpful, but I didn't want to be a criminal. They, of course, went over my head. First they went to Phil Watson, and then they went to the president. And they told them, no, we can't do that. That's illegal. I've tried for years to specify the difference in weakness and conscience, which makes somebody vulnerable, and scruples, which are simply somebody's opinion about how things ought to be. I don't know that I've got a very good picture on that. But I think we can safely say, in just the language of the street, that Paul's advice here is to be nice to one another in the sense that we treat somebody better than we treat ourselves in a situation. And so we need unity, we want unity. Jesus prayed for unity. We're not going to have unity politically. Half the people are on one side and half on the other side, and they all see it right. The only way you have to do to be right is to see things my way. And we're not getting any better about that and not about to. And that may be okay nationally. But in our faith, it is necessary and important that we take care of those who may not be quite as far along as we are, may not look exactly like us, or in some ways are different. Let me close that down by saying that, excuse me, that's a good formula for marriage. If you would be successfully married, treat your mate better than you treat yourself. Don't just do what's required, but go far beyond that if you can. And in the same way in the church. And let me finish finally by saying that having people in your presence who care about you and who believe that you're on their side and care about them is really a nice thing, nothing better. And I so look forward to the time that we can be in each other's presence and enjoy one another. Let's finish with a prayer. Our Heavenly Father, as Jesus prayed for unity, so do we. As Paul recommended unity, so do we. Bless us and help us be patient until the time that we can be together again. In Jesus' name, amen.